Track 12. This will destroy you. The paths down the ridge of the house to the docks drew thin and white in the evening light, switchbacks sewn into stone. Children moved in twos down the steep rock stairway, shoulders brushing, hands skimming the mossed rails as the sea spoke from below. The air was cool where the rock kept its shade. They drifted onto the shoreline, and the water widened before them. The beach stretched in a long crescent of black stone and gray sand. The gathering came once a quarter, a time when the moon pulled the waves in slow breaths across a horizon that went on forever. They called it the endless. No one knew what waited beyond it. Yet, no one ever questioned it. Still, the sight of that endless water stole something from their lungs every time. Mixed feelings of awe and ache, the same feelings that lived in the space between going back to the route and leaving the house. A flyer took one last look at their home before the next gathering in the route commenced. At the bottom of the cliff, the stone docks waited. They had been carved entirely from massive slabs of black stone that reached into the water like long, ancient pathways, broad enough to walk side by side, rough enough to outlast storms. They felt older than Eden itself. This was where the roughies would sneak away to hang out after long days in the stables, sitting on the cold rock with the tide at their feet, singing, arguing, retelling stories that never seemed to end. This place held all of it, the sound of voices, the weight of memories, and that where Jet got his first name from. One of the many places in Eden where these children felt free. Feel Good Incorporated was still truly home. Each stone path held the longships, a smaller boat where its carved hull rocked gently against the rock, as keepers coiled wet ropes into perfect black circles at their feet. As the children stepped onto the docks, something steadied inside them. They were heading back to their roots with mixed hearts, caught between dread and relief, because before they would leave, there was always a moment where they knew they may no longer be safe, that the shadow would draw nearer, where Frey was weakest. But things felt a little more bearable at the edge of the world, because the ones beside them made the gathering feel like something they could face, because some never knew what they would be returning back to. Nothing was guaranteed. At the end of the docks, the mini longships waited for the children who qualified for the gathering. They had dragon heads rising from the prows, each one pointed west. They were made from a substance no one knew. Whatever the curator carved them from had outlasted storms, salt, and time itself. The hulls held no rot, no rust, just a dull sheen like bone polished by centuries of use. No one remembered a time they hadn't been here. In the water, they bobbed like sleeping creatures tethered by patience. Foam stitched itself between them, floating the same direction again and again, proof that the current did not ask permission. The line broke onto the lowest landing, keepers untied in rhythm, ropes slapped against their hulls. One by one, the boats were eased into the pull, and one by one they surrendered to it, gliding so slowly it felt like the water was deciding for them. Two pairs climbed into the vessel with practiced weight. As always, a flyer and a ranger stepped into the front of the mini longship, while a drafter and a wanderer sat mirroring them, just like every other watercraft headed back to the roots. The keeper's palm pressed to the dragonhead and held it steady, waiting for a larger ripple to roll by. The water came gentler than usual, being this close to the shore. The current caught the bottom and the children started to float down easily. Foam curled at the water's edge. Nothing else drifted anywhere near them. The fleet slid west, a brief, quiet procession. The water took them like a river without complaint. But as their many longships drifted west, the vessel slipped past the docks in the opposite direction. Its hull was longer than the children's, the bow smooth and faceless, built not for passengers, but for purpose. Glass cylinders glowed in its belly, stacked in metal cradles that hummed faintly as it sailed toward the horizon. No keeper shouted orders, no crew steered the helm. The ship simply released itself into the water and went, as if answering a summons older than the roots themselves. Some of the younger contributors pointed and wondered when their time would come to sail to Eden East. They whispered of ghosts at its wheel. Most didn't bother looking. They'd seen it helm. The vessel always left at dusk, gliding toward that pale shape on the horizon, feeding a promise almost everyone talked about and everyone depended on. In the other direction, no one ever steered past the Great Divide. Beyond it, the Fury waited. Too dangerous for these boats were not built for a surfer's delight. Even the keepers turned in before the current thinned. For a time, it was just the hush of water slapping on the hold sides and the low comfort of other boats close by. The boats drifted under the house where children leaned over the rails, held back by keepers with strong hands. At the back rail, where a roughie who wasn't returning for the gathering would stand, their shoulders squared, chin up the way they wore with courage when it didn't fit yet. One spotted a flyer and lifted an arm in a quick, bright wave. The movement flashed like a coin tossed to catch light. They lowered their hand and didn't move until his boat slid past the angle of their view. But the flyer was distracted and caught only a silhouette. And by the time they realized where they were, they turned to wave bye to the silhouette, but they were out of their line of sight. They had missed them. They felt for them, whoever it was. The current continued to pull them further inland, and they weren't sure they'd seen them. They both frowned out of one another's view and then looked to what was next. With every glance, it seemed like their destination got closer and closer. With every look came a tug at their body, like something was pulling them toward which Ho waited. A ranger broke first, voice low enough to be mistaken for a thought. Q2's almost here, they said, and I'm up for the marksman this year. The flyer didn't look away from their line of sight, their eyes looking back at the house. Imagine what the reactions will be when you win. The ranger's grin came easy. Yeah, I know. The other children laughed and shook their heads. When a stunner is shot, the drafter started, the opponent tends to flinch, even for a split second. The ranger smirked again. Not me. It's all about discipline. That's the secret. They flicked their fingers, mock aiming at the wanderer across from them. Just keep your eyes on the target, and bang. And what do you see when you look at the target? Your faces, obviously. They all laughed again. It all seems so fake to me, the wanderer said, with a subtle curiosity. The ranger huffed. They can say that all they want. Only the best rangers even enter into the shadow circuit. Talk to me when you've competed in something like that. You haven't even competed in it yet. This is the first year you're even able to enter, the drafter laughed. The ranger was about to open their mouth before Flyer stepped in. I've seen it. It's not fake. But if it came down to it, if you had to sacrifice yourself, though, said Flyer gently. The way they said it, half serious, half show, made the space between them warmer. Somewhere behind them, Another boat drifted into view, and the Rangers said, almost to themselves, "Sacrifice, it's the way." "Wouldn't expect anything less," said the flyer with a smile. The Ranger and Drafter backed off, but their bodies stayed tense. The flyer sighed. The Wanderer didn't argue either. Their eyes were more focused, drawn past the bow and into the shifting dark of the water. They sat quiet on the edge, mind drifting with the wind and spray, savoring the rare peace of watching the elements move without needing anything from them. Yet it was like they were waiting for something, a sign maybe. They cleared the ridge near the house. The water widened and flattened, violet still reflecting on the surface where the sky's morning couldn't reach. The dragon heads bit the light with small silver teeth. Ahead, the coast narrowed to its stone throat. Behind, the house collected itself into a single dark geometry. The Ranger dragged their fingertips along the water below. "You guys ready to get back to the route?" they asked, not looking at the rest. "Will we get put on notice?" the flyer asked. The drafter's mouth tilted at the corner. "We're always on notice." "Here we go," the flyer said to nobody. The drafter answered, "You know." No one answered at first. The flyer was on edge. The Ranger leaned in. The Wanderer wasn't listening. The drafter's orange light glowed bright. They continued. "You know the parts no one else wants to look at," the drafter said softly, eyes on the water. "It doesn't matter if your unit puts you on notice. You will notice. That's why the light changed for you. Not because of praise, but because something carried you. Something took that weight and steadied it. That's what it's there for, so you don't have to hold it alone." They all stayed quiet, but something in the way they held their shoulders said each one felt a different way about it. The drafter kept going, voice still warm. "Drafters always say life is a game. About never slipping, never faltering. But that's not it. Not really." They traced the glow on their wristband with their thumb. "You have something you can go to when you've got nothing left to give. It doesn't pull you to your feet. It just stays with you until you can stand again." A small breath escaped the Ranger. The flyer wasn't moving, and the hurt in their face eased by a degree. Even the Wanderer had turned their attention inside. The drafter's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, steady and sure, the wind tugging at their hair. Contributors make it complicated. The game doesn't. Play it with your heart. All you can do is keep moving forward. The four of them let the silence settle. The drafter kept his eyes down, speaking one last thought, almost to himself. "And maybe will be enough." They all glanced at their lights. The water did the talking for a bit. A minute passed, or maybe 5. Boats slipped by each other in slow patterns that felt like memory. "My unit doesn't even check in anymore, anyway," a ranger said. "We pretend it's all okay unless someone says otherwise." They watched the thin line of foam braid itself against the hull. The flyer next to them replied, "I'm just glad you all have a future after the binding. Your divisions know where they'll land. You guys have to be excited about that, right?" The ranger didn't answer. The wanderer looked for patterns in the dusk and tide. A drafter spoke, voice steady as the tide. "You'll land exactly where you need to," they said, looking at none of them and all of them at once. "Some paths are already drawn. Mine's one of them." The flyer glanced at them. The drafter brushed a finger over the light of his band as they continued speaking. As a drafter, I'm expected to climb, the drafter said, looking to the water's edge. They say I have choices, but we're expected to find our place in the drift. His tone wasn't bitter, just matter of fact, like naming the shape of a stone. It's a good place, though, they added. What they do? You get to set your own pace for the next cycle. You get to study. You get a few days off each season, too. They tried to smile. Not that I'll need them. I want to push through. Try to become the best Eden's ever had. The Wanderer's focus was elsewhere. The ranger huffed a breath and tried to see what the Wanderer was seeing. The flyer listened hard, soaking in every word. Then one of them let their eyes slip again toward the horizon, faint light catching on his features. But even then, they said softly, there's only so far you can go. Not everyone can receive preservation before Eden's age anyway. There are some who don't even make it to that. They're still here wandering around, because even to be preserved at Eden's age is not a right. It's earned, and number 44 stayed on as long as was required. Why does that even mean? The flyer asked. No one knows. And we may never find out, they replied. But the point is, you want to be preserved as early as possible before your time is up. Because the later you're preserved, the less time in Eden East you'll have. Doesn't matter how perfect your performance is. They shrugged, a small, resigned gesture. Some roles weren't made for rising. They're made for holding the world in place while others do. And unless you have the required amount of credits to get in, then forget it. You're here for the long haul. Then they all went silent, except for the Wanderer. And where did you learn that from? A wanderer, the drafter replied. The Wanderer nodded in approval. The coast started to pinch to rock. The fleet slipped past its shoulder and into the long, slow western way. The cliffs on either side became dark. Only a faint lattice glow traced this part of Eden, the phrase reflection barely visible amongst the root. Far off, gulls folded themselves into the wind and let the wind decide. A flyer felt their chest tighten. They all saw that too, and felt it. Yet, no one said it. So the flyer forced the air lighter. Remember the time in the galley? They said, gesturing towards the Wanderer. When you slipped on the saltwater grate and blamed the wind? The ranger and drafter barked laughs. The Wanderer rolled their eyes but smiled, tracing the sky for patterns like even the memory had a rhythm. From there, the stories poured in, not spoken in full, but alive between them all. A wanderer brought up one from the whale, something with rhythms too loud, lanterns swinging wild, and a night where the whole world felt bigger than them. Their laughter came fast and bright, the boys half standing in the boat, as if the deck itself remembered the beat. Then a ranger mentioned a story from the scene when a fight broke out in the pit, and wondered if they'd get stationed there one day. Reactions hit at once. Wide eyes, quick grins, shoulders lifting like smoke. The air around them felt charged with an old, reckless freedom. A flyer added memories of another contributor they'd met up with one night. Their friends didn't believe them. They joked they probably stole the story from something they'd seen in a bareback book. The laughs kept coming, the kind of nostalgia that lived in a raised eyebrow or sudden grin, the kind of remembering that made you feel invincible. The stories thinned finally, settling into a warm silence. Children on old built boats drifting toward their roots, friends bound by fear, by faith, and by whatever tomorrow demanded. The mood stayed light, buoyant and familiar, right up until the first stone steps of the roots rose into view, leading them back to the place that made them. The current thickened with silt where the current met the breakers. The boat slowed as if they were moving through a long held breath. Rocks sticking out into the water appeared low and dark at the base of the Great Divide, rails and posts worn smooth by years of landings. Keepers stepped into the water and caught the prows with open palms, weight sure, boots taking the cold without comment. Ropes wound around cleats in tight figure eights. The dragon heads rested. Above, the cliff steps looked just as endless as the water. The roots climbed the face like a constellation that had chosen a single wall. One of them tilted their head back to find the window that might be theirs. They didn't find it, but the looking did what it always did, an attempt to steady their breathing without having to try too hard. Keepers took the boats in their arms the way parents carried sleeping saplings. The children stepped out, soles hitting the stone in a soft syncopation. The line formed itself without being told, and the first of them began the climb. One of them hesitated behind child with a prosthetic at the bottom step, a flicker of unease tightening their chest. The climb home always felt heavier than the running that earned it. Their chest grew heavier with every step up towards their route. They placed their foot on the bottom step. Another child fell in line beside them, a shoulder's width away. From the far side of the Great Divide, the sea lifted its voice. It wasn't thunder and it wasn't a machine. It was the large, old sound of water finding stone and refusing to be finished with it. The air cooled something older than salt pressed into their shirts and listened to their lungs. The fury howled from the opposite side. It only waited to remind them how small they really were. The children continued their climb toward their roots, and the sound of the fury stalked them. And it felt like something else was too. The path from the bottom wound through the lower terraces, the air still wet with salt. Lamps flickered along the walk, their glass catching the reflection from the family unit's lights above. The children split off, each veering toward their family units, voices thinning as their paths divided. They walked slower than the rest, shoes leaving wet imprints behind them. Neither said much at first. They walked by retired contributors, trying to stay warm. The day had already taken most of their words. When they reached the turn that would split them, they all nodded once, the way children did when they'd already said everything that mattered. They looked at one another like they were going off to war, embraced, and went their separate ways. One of them turned toward the western row, the sound of his shoes fading before he could think of what to say next. For a moment, he watched the lamps stretch their light across the walkway, one by one, all the way to the end. Then he turned toward his own door. Inside the unit, the air held a stillness that felt unfamiliar. A towel hung over the chair the same way it always did, a maintenance man's boots by the door, an orange light glowing on the wall. Everything seemed in its place. The door shut slowly after them. They stood there a moment before they realized something felt wrong, like something had followed the child inside.